Welcome to the Deep Dive. So today we're tackling a really big one, something that just keeps people talking. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Absolutely. It's endlessly fascinating and frustrating too, I think.
Definitely. We've got some interesting material here, basically transcripts pulling from news analysis and historical takes on YouTube channels like The Sun and Johnny Harris.
Right. Our goal here, our sort of mission for this deep dive, is to wade through all that information. We want to look at the conspiracies, the different possibilities people have thrown around over the decades.
And maybe try to understand what conclusions, if any, have actually been reached, or maybe more accurately, not reached.
Exactly. We know listeners want to cut through the noise, so we'll try to lay out what these sources say about how the story formed, where the doubts came in, and the conclusions, or the lack thereof.
Okay, let's dive in. Right after it happened, November 63, Dallas.
Yeah, he was identified very quickly. And the FBI, specifically J. Edgar Hoover, well, he seemed pretty convinced, almost instantly, that Oswald was the guy, the only guy.
Even before a full investigation, right?
Yeah.
That seems quick.
It does, and, President Johnson, LBJ, he apparently voiced concerns about a rash of investigations popping up everywhere.
Understandable, I guess. Chaos.
Right. So that concern is part of what led to setting up the Warren Commission. The idea was to get the official story out there, maybe calm things down.
And the commission's big finding, Oswald acted alone, fired 3 shots, end of story.
Well, that was the conclusion. But then you get to the really tricky part, the thing that's fueled so much debate, the single bullet theory.
Yes, the magic bullet. Explain that a bit.
Okay, so the theory goes that one bullet caused, get this, 7 different wounds in both Kennedy and Governor Connally, who was sitting in front of him.
7 wounds from one bullet. This sounds improbable just saying it.
It does stretch credulity for many. I mean, think about the path that bullet would have had to take. And then the bullet itself, CE-399, was found later.
How is its condition?
Well, some experts described it as remarkably intact, almost pristine, considering the supposed damage it caused. That's a major sticking point.
Plus, they only found 3 shell casings up in the book depository, right?
Exactly. 3 casings, 3 shots concluded. That single bullet doing all that work, it's one of the core issues that makes people question the official story.
You can see why. And it wasn't just later theorists questioning it. Didn't one of the transcripts mention a memo?
Yeah, from the Deputy Attorney General around that time. It basically highlighted the urgent need, to convince the public that Oswald was the lone assassin.
So there was pressure right from the start to nail down that narrative.
Absolutely. And it's in that context, with these early questions and the pressure for a simple answer, that you see the seeds of doubt really starting to grow, which of course leads us straight into conspiracy territory.
And it wasn't just public doubt, was it? The investigation itself had issues.
Big time. Our sources point out that both the FBI and the CIA, well, they weren't exactly playing nice with the Warren Commission. They held stuff back.
Information wasn't shared.
Not fully, no. And get this, even LBJ himself, according to these sources, later privately expressed doubts about Oswald acting alone. He apparently suspected maybe the Cubans were involved.
As retaliation.
Yeah, possibly retaliation for all those CIA plots against Castro, the secret stuff, assassination attempts, things like that.
Wow. And Governor Connally, the man wounded by that supposed single bullet.
He went public saying he didn't buy the single bullet theory. He was there, he was hit, and he disagreed with the official explanation of how it happened.
That's powerful testimony against the theory.
It really is. Then you add the Zapruder film, that famous home movie of the assassination.
Which wasn't widely seen initially, right?
Yeah. No, its release was delayed. But when people finally saw it, frame by frame, it seemed, to many at least, to contradict the timing and the effects described by the Warren Commission, like Kennedy's head movement.
Yeah, the backward snap.
Exactly. That fueled a lot of suspicion.
You have to remember the context of the time, too. The late 60s, early 70s.
Oh, absolutely. Trust in government was already taking a nosedive. You had Vietnam escalating, then later Watergate.
So people were maybe primed to think, okay, they're probably not telling us the whole truth about this either.
Precisely. It created fertile ground for conspiracy theories to really take root and spread. The official story just didn't sit right with a lot of people, given everything else that was going on.
Which led to another investigation later on.
Yes. In the 1970s, the House Select Committee on Assassinations took another look, and their findings were pretty explosive, actually.
What did they conclude?
They basically said the Warren Commission's investigation wasn't good enough. And crucially, they found there was a high probability of 2 gunmen, and therefore a conspiracy.
2 gunmen. Based on what?
Well, that finding hinged heavily on acoustic evidence, like analyzing sounds from a police radio recording from Dealey Plaza.
Sounds scientific.
It did initially, but later analysis really cast doubt on that evidence. Questions about whether the recording was even from the time of the assassination, whether the sounds were actually gunshots. It got very messy. So that 2 gunmen conclusion is now widely disputed.
Okay, so not definitive proof then.
Not definitive, no. But the committee did confirm something else important, that the FBI and CIA had definitely withheld information from the Warren Commission earlier.
They doubled down on that lack of cooperation.
Yes. And there was even testimony from an FBI agent who said he'd been ordered to destroy a letter Oswald had apparently written to the Bureau before the assassination.
Destroy evidence. That sounds bad.
It certainly doesn't help build confidence in the official narrative, does it? It just adds fuel to the conspiracy fire.
Speaking of which, let's talk about some of the main theories. The CIA one is huge, right?
Oh yeah, the idea that elements within the CIA might have been involved, the motive, maybe JFK was trying to limit their power, shut down some of their more aggressive covert operations, especially the anti-Castro stuff.
Which ties back to LBJ's suspicion about Cuba.
It does. The Cuba angle is another major theory, either Castro retaliating for the CIA plots, or maybe anti-Castro Cuban exiles who felt betrayed by Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs.
Lots of potential motives swirling around there.
Definitely. And then, you get into some of the, let's call them less mainstream theories mentioned in one of the sources.
Okay, like what?
Well, the Sun transcript mentions a few, kind of amusingly. There's one about revenge from families connected to the USS Thrasher submarine sinking.
Okay.
Another involves LBJ himself somehow leaping out of his car with a machine gun.
Wait, seriously?
Apparently, that's a theory someone floated. And of course, the idea that JFK was about to spill the beans about aliens.
Aliens, right. So quite a range of speculation.
A very wide range. It shows how, in the absence of a satisfying official answer, people will come up with, well, almost anything.
But let's pull back to some more developed theories. One source mentioned a book, The Oswald Puzzle.
Yes, that theory suggests Oswald wasn't just a lone nut, but actually a patsy. Completely framed.
Framed by whom?
And why?
Potentially by Castro supporters, or maybe even double agents. The alleged goal, according to this theory, was to make it look like Oswald did it for Castro, hoping it would trigger a U.S. invasion of Cuba.
Wow. Okay. That's elaborate.
It is. The theory points to things like alleged phone calls made right after the assassination, supposedly trying to plant the story that Oswald was part of a Cuban rifle team or something. The idea being that the simple lone nut story actually interrupted this more complex plot.
So the official story might have accidentally messed up a different conspiracy.
That's the suggestion in that particular theory, yeah. That calls were made to Dallas to shut down talk of conspiracy and just pin it all on Oswald for his cloak and dagger. And what about the CIA's view of Oswald before the assassination? They knew about him, right? His trip to Russia.
Oh, they knew about him. One source notes that the CIA was apparently very curious about how quickly he got into the Soviet Union back in '59.
Curious? What does that imply?
Well, it's ambiguous, isn't it? On one hand, if they were genuinely surprised, it suggests they didn't facilitate his trip. On the other hand, why the intense curiosity if he wasn't already on their radar in some significant way? It just raises more questions about their prior knowledge or potential interests.
It feels like every answer just leads to more questions.
That's the JFK assassination in a nutshell, I think. And a big part of why we can't get definitive answers is because of, well, obstacles, things that got in the way of the truth.
Like evidence being destroyed.
Exactly. The sources mention things like Secret Service motorcade route planning documents being destroyed shortly after. Surveillance tapes, too.
That seems suspicious.
It does. Although, interestingly, some of those destroyed documents apparently turned up later, found in the records of another agency. So maybe not destroyed, just misplaced or hidden.
Still doesn't inspire confidence. What else?
Missing records. There was a key CIA figure, James Angleton, who basically took charge of the internal CIA investigation. His records related to Oswald. Many are missing.
Convenient.
You could say that. Then there's testimony from Jackie Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother. It's been reported they both believed it was a domestic conspiracy, not foreign.
We don't know for sure what they said.
No, their testimony was sealed potentially for decades. Imagine what insights might be in there.
And the CIA's own investigation. did they ever actually report their findings?
That's another huge issue. We know the CIA did conduct an internal investigation. We even know some of the questions they were asking themselves about Oswald and potential agency connections.
But the answers, the final report,
Missing. Likely destroyed. And worse, the CIA apparently lied about even doing this internal review to both the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee later on.
they lied about investigating themselves. Why?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It screams cover-up, or at least a profound lack of transparency.
And you mentioned the Warren Commission maybe ignoring witnesses.
Yeah, there are accusations they cherry-picked evidence. For example, some doctors at Parkland Hospital initially described Kennedy's head wound as suggesting a shot from the front.
Which contradicts the lone gunman firing from behind.
Exactly. But the commission tended to dismiss or downplay testimony that didn't fit their conclusion.
It seems like there are also potentially crucial pieces of visual evidence we can't access.
Right. Other films and photos taken in Dealey Plaza that day. Some are held by media companies or private collectors, and due to legal reasons or ownership claims, they're not available for independent public analysis. More potential clarity locked away.
So, despite all this, these missing files, destroyed evidence, questionable testimony, there has been an effort to release documents, hasn't there?
Yes, thankfully. A 1992 law, the JFK Records Act, mandated that assassination-related documents held by the government should be released.
And have they been?
Mostly. By 2017, something like 5 million pages of documents were made public through the National Archives. A huge trove of information.
5 million pages. Has that solved it? Found the smoking gun?
Well, that's the frustrating part. Despite all that declassification, there hadn't been a single document, a smoking gun, that definitively proves a grand conspiracy or completely overturns the lone gunman theory.
But some documents are still being withheld.
Yes. A few thousand remain fully or partially classified. The CIA primarily has resisted releasing everything, citing national security concerns, even now.
Which, of course, just keeps the suspicion alive. If there's nothing to hide.
Then why hide it? Exactly. It fuels that enduring feeling many people have that they haven't been told the full story, even if we can't point to Exhibit A proving a conspiracy.
So after all this time, all the investigations, all the documents, what's the biggest question still hanging out there, according to these sources?
You know, the Sun transcript really boils it down. It asks, was Lee Harvey Oswald involved at all? Or was he, as his own famous words claimed, just a patsy? Was he the shooter, a collaborator, or completely set up? That seems to be the fundamental uncertainty.
So wrapping this up, it's just complex. You have the official story with its, let's say, inconsistencies.
Right, inconsistencies that open the door wide for doubt almost immediately.
Then you have this huge spectrum of theories, from plausible-sounding conspiracies involving government agencies or foreign powers.
All the way to, well, aliens and machine gun-toting vice presidents.
Yeah, but the bottom line seems to be, despite millions of pages of documents and decades of searching, there's no universally accepted, definitively proven answer.
No. The concrete, irrefutable proof of a large-scale conspiracy just hasn't emerged from the publicly available evidence. But that doesn't mean the questions go away.
And a key takeaway here seems to be about government transparency, or the lack of it.
Absolutely critical. You see how withholding information, destroying files, maybe even outright lying, how that erodes trust. Even if there wasn't some huge conspiracy, the appearance of cover-up has done lasting damage.
It's created this environment where theories can just thrive.
Exactly. It feeds the mystery.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with something to chew on. A final thought. Considering everything we've discussed, the evidence we have, the evidence we don't have, the contradictions, the missing pieces.
Yeah.
If one single piece of evidence could suddenly appear tomorrow, what do you think would be the most powerful? What single thing could fundamentally change how we understand the JFK assassination? Think beyond just who might have done it, but maybe the why behind it all. What revelation would shift everything?
That's a tough one. A lot to think about.
Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.